All right, so when we left off, we were talking about human population growth, and we talked about those age structure pyramids. We're going to do our data either at the end of the period today or beginning of the period tomorrow. And remember, those age structure pyramids can be used to predict the future. So how much health care are we going to need? How many schools are we going to need? Are we going to need to increase Social Security because our population is aging out of the workforce? Those are useful for management of your country. We talked about metapopulations, how two distinct populations, but there's spread of people between the two, maintains genetic diversity, allows for the influx of affluence, but also disease. Where I want to go today is the demographic transition model that you see on the board. There are 4 phases to demographic transition. Phase 1 is pre-industrial. So you are still living on the farm, you're still hand planting, hand harvesting all of your crops. It is subsistence living. So just enough to keep your family alive. Because of that, you have really high birth rates and really high death rates. Life is hard. Medical care is not easy to get to. It's not very advanced. And so a lot of the children that you are having are also dying. Because of that, your population remains relatively low. Phase 2, we have our move into agriculture that is mechanical. So now instead of you hand harvesting everything, you have a machine that is doing it for you. Healthcare is coming up. Your education is increasing. And therefore, your death rate is falling. Life has gotten easier. It is easier to survive. But your birth rates are still really high. Well, low death rate and high birth rate leads to higher population. Phase 3 is industrial revolution. We've urbanized. We've moved away from the farm now. Life has gotten substantially easier, and I don't need a bunch of kids because guess what? I'm not farming anymore. And so my birth rate drops and will eventually match my death rate. Our population is kind of starting to stabilize at the tail end of phase 3. Phase 4 is where the United States is right now. We are fully industrialized. We have good healthcare, good education. And because of that, our birth rate and our death rate are low, and our population has stabilized. We have almost hit that ideal of zero population. Zero population says that we are going to do things to make it so that we are maintaining. We're not losing, we're not gaining. Year in, year out, our population stays the same. A couple of ways to do that. The first way to do it is to delay the onset of pregnancy. If I have a kid at 14, I'm going to have a lot more children than if I don't have my first kid until I'm 28. Because, by the time I have 2 or 3 kids starting at 28, I'm old, I'm tired, I don't want to do it anymore. But at 14, you're going to have a lot more children. We know that there is a correlation between education and delay of first child. So if I can keep a child in high school, they're not going to have their first kid at 14. If I can keep a kid in college, now they're probably going to delay it until after the age of 22. And I know that if a woman gets a college education, she is more likely to want to use that education before she settles down. And so that's going to push off childbirth even further. The longer I can delay that first child, the less children that family is going to have. If through family planning I can space out my children. So have you guys heard the term Irish twins before? It's 2 kids born within a year of each other. Because, a woman can have a child every 9 months. If instead of having a child every 9 months, a woman has a child every 2 to 3 years, they are going to have less children in their lifetime. And last but not least, you guys touched on this a lot during our debates, family planning. So education in schools about the benefits of smaller family size, and then the availability of contraceptives. Why do we care? Why do we want to hit zero population growth? The more people there are on the planet, the more we affect this planet, usually in a negative way. And so if we can cut down and stabilize our human population, we can maintain the planet as it is. We know, by the way, that in addition to having more people, the more affluent your country is, the more resources you use. Affluence is how much money does your country have. And we measure the amount of money with GDP, gross domestic product. The higher the gross domestic product, the higher the influence on the environment, the higher the resource use, the higher the amount of pollution. Not saying we need to be poor, but we do need to be aware that the more affluent we are, the more resources we're going to use. There is actually an equation for this, and we're not going to ever ask you to calculate it, but you need to know what the words are here. So the impact that your country has on the environment is equal to the size of your population. Obviously, the bigger the population, the more impact. Times the affluence. The richer you are, the bigger impact. Times technology. Why is technology in this equation? How does technology play into impact?
It increases the amount of resources used.
Yeah. You guys all now are sitting, most of you, with a computer in front of you. They have to be plugged in. And how are we getting the energy for your computers? Electricity, which is coming from where in our country or in our area? Solar panels are a little bit of it. The power plants, and the power plants are getting it from where? Fossil fuels. Thank you. That was a long journey to fossil fuels. So the more technology we have, the more fossil fuels we're going to use because we have to plug this technology in. In addition, are our batteries and the processes that we go through to make our batteries good for the environment? What happens to your iPhone 10 when you get the iPhone 11? We hopefully recycle them, but most likely we're probably just tossing it, which is going into the landfills, which is extra pollution. So the more technology we have, the more impact we have on the environment. And again, not saying we can't have technology, just saying we have to be wise about how we use it. Every day, about 22,000 people are added to the planet. That's a net gain. So that's accounting for birth rate and death rate. In 1798, a gentleman called Malthus estimated that the carrying capacity for humans was 6 billion. We surpassed 6 billion in the year 2000. Why have we been able to go past carrying capacity? Technology. So for every problem that humans bump into, that if we were a normal animal would say, oops, that's it, carrying capacity, we've overcome. So we run out of food, awesome, technology. I now have big machines that can harvest my crops faster, so I can feed more people. Oops, we run out of land, I have technology I can build up. We've been able to overcome all of the obstacles of carrying capacity that a normal animal sees because we've got these really advanced brains. We are outthinking the environment. So I think I've said before, humans, instead of adapting to their environment, adapt their environment to us, and not necessarily always in the best way. A short-term limiting effect or factor for humans is famine. So when we see famine in countries like Ethiopia, it drops the population of that country dramatically. We know that there are countries that are food insecure. Egypt, for instance, imports 100% of its food. That causes problems, right? Because if you get in a disagreement with a country that's supplying you food, what happens? Your people go hungry. So food is the main limiting factor that can drop our population. Doesn't always. Intermediate effect, we're going to see the effect on the population within 1 to 10 years. Desertification is where we take fertile land and it turns into a desert because we're misusing it. We're taking away the nutrients by planting the same crop over and over and over again. Well, if we turn our cropland into a desert, we then limit the food and we have a food shortage. And then pollutants in the atmosphere. Long-term effects, These take about 10 years to catch up. So we do it, 10 years later, we'll see an effect on the population. Big in California is our decline in groundwater. So in our last huge drought, extended drought, we took so much groundwater from underneath, from our aquifers, that California actually sunk. We could see it in satellite pictures that the elevation of our state decreased because we were pulling water out of these cavities. We think that it's possible we already hit and surpassed carrying capacity. And we know that or assume that because things like wood production peaked in 1977. So if you were to graph the amount of wood that we were harvesting out of the forests, we harvested the most in 1967 and 1967, and it's declined since then. Some of that has to do with technology though, right? Because now, instead of them sending you the ad in the mail, they can email you. And in fact, if it wasn't for all of the college junk mail, I would get very little junk mail in my mailbox, right? If the colleges could like maybe not send out a flyer a day, University of Chicago, it'd be awesome, right? Fish production peaked in 1970. Again, if we were to graph the amount of fish that we're pulling out of the ocean, we pulled the most in 1970. We can't blame that decrease on technology. We have overfished certain populations to the point where you can't get that kind of fish anymore. Beef and cereal, when we say cereal, we're talking about oats and grains, peaked in 1977. Technology has let us come past the idea that we don't have as much fish or we don't have as much beef. We can come up with other things to eat. So we haven't seen a decrease in human population yet, but these are suggestions that we're getting close. On your study guide is some information from previous chapters. So I wanted to throw some slides in here just so that you're not doing your study guide going, oh, she didn't talk about this in this unit. I can't answer this question. The slides are here. Ecological footprint. Someone remind me what the ecological footprint is. If I say you've got a big ecological footprint, what are you doing?
You use a lot of resources, a lot of resources.
Yeah, so your ecological footprint is a measurement of the amount of resources that you are using within a given year. So if you have a big ecological footprint, you're using a lot of resources. If you have a small ecological footprint, you're probably living off the grid in Montana with solar panels and a creek and an outhouse in the back 40. So it's the amount of stuff that you're using measured in hectares. Remember, we had all of these ecological value systems. And I'm not going to read through them all again because I've already done that once this year. But the slides are here. How does this play into human population? Your ecological value system will determine maybe how many children you have. If you look at your ecological value system and you know that the more children you have, the higher impact you have on the environment, maybe you don't have as many kids or any kids at all. Ecological value system plays a part in that. Ecological overshoot is the day at which we've used all of the resources for the year and we are now borrowing from the future. This is like if the resources were a bank account and I've allotted a certain amount for the current year. In 2015, I will have used that allotment by August 13th, which means August 14th to January, I am now borrowing from the future. I'm borrowing from my children in order to sustain my lifestyle. The goal here is not to borrow resources, to live within your means ecologically. 2 reproductive strategies, K and R. A K species is one that lives to old age, takes a long time before it has its first child, and when it has its first child, has a lot of parental care. And because of that, they need a stable ecosystem. They need that ecosystem to be the same every year that you're trying to raise this kid that takes about 15 years to raise. our astragalus are having a lot of kids, reproducing very frequently, having a ton of kids thrown out in the environment with no parental care, and they realize that 10% will make it. And the rest, oh well, cost of doing business. They do very well in polluted environments, in environments that are constantly changing, in poor ecological ecosystems. K. astragalus, stable, happy ecosystems. R. astragalus tend to be found more in ecosystems that are changing a lot. And then I showed you guys a survivorship curve where our K. astragalus are type 1. They live to long age. There's not a lot of them born, but they all are going to survive. Versus an R. astragalus, which is type 3. A ton of them are born, but very few of them live to old age. And then type 2, which rarely exists in nature. Comments, questions, concerns? You now have everything you need to fill out your study guide. You have everything you need for your test, which is scheduled on